Now, the verse I'd like to draw attention to in Luke is the one in verse 34 where it says, "Watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation, escapism, distractions, drunkenness, and the cares of this life, that day come upon you like a trap." Right? And then another one in verse 28, "When you see these things begin to come to pass, straighten up, raise your heads, for your redemption is drawing nigh." Now, verse 28 is particularly interesting because if you visualize it, right, you've got to straighten up and then raise your head. So if that's what we're encouraged to do, where are the people's minds and heads before they're instructed? Well, they're like that, right? So you have to straighten up and then you have to raise your heads. And I find it quite ironic when you visualise what Jesus' exhortation is, that when you hop on the tram these days, everybody is like that. Everyone's buried in their own worlds and their own things, and they've got these alerts coming up and down all the time, all throughout the day. And of course, we are part of that. We're in that, right? We're influenced by it. We can't say that we're separate from it, right? And so the warning of verse 34 is a very, very pertinent warning. Now, you may or may not know, well, I'm sure you all know, that this year the world has come closer to a global conflict than it ever has since probably the middle of the Cold War. I reckon the Cuban Missile Crisis was the last time Russia and America actually became poised, ready to start a war and fight one another. And America pushed, and Russia didn't respond. Had Russia responded, we could have ended up with a major Middle Eastern confrontation, which most commentators were saying could spread throughout the then known world. North Korea is another flashpoint, right? It could break out at any time. Nuclear weapons are on the table, right? And again, America has pushed, right? But in this case, they've come to the negotiating table. Now, that's a first in my lifetime, right? That the nuclear powers have become this close to a war where the gauntlet was thrown down and responded to, and we thought, is Russia going to respond? Are they going to attack? Are they going to respond in kind? And they didn't, and war was averted. But I have to be honest with you, brothers and sisters, I don't live my life right now as though I've just escaped potential global war. And I think it comes down to that verse 34 in Luke's chapter. Because there are so many things going on in my day-to-day world, so many things to think about, so little time to pause and reflect. And when you look at the media spin cycle, and we use Internet Explorer at work, and so you get the snapshot of Explorer News. And of course it's all the Kardashians and the latest Emmy Awards and the Oscars, and all of it is about, look over here, this peekaboo world. And you go on to things like Facebook, where there's constantly, here's my new dress, here's my pot plant, my dog ate my cat, you know. And it's all this constant flow of things that we can just immerse ourselves in and look at. And of course the world is turning at this breakneck speed, but I have to be honest with you, I don't feel like I've fully absorbed it. That we averted that crisis, and I never really had time to reflect and think, that's something. That could have been the trigger, right, that ignited the world. Right? So it's a very real problem, brothers and sisters, and I think we're honest with ourselves. It does affect us all. I watch too many things on YouTube. I find myself distracted with things that I shouldn't be distracted to. And it's a personal battle. There's no formulated response where we can say, well, if you just did this and this and this. No, it's not that easy. We all know that. So it's a conversation we all must have with ourselves, with our spouses, and with our children. Because this is the world that we live in. And separation is now, we're a bit like Daniel. Here's Daniel, he's got a job in Babylon. How can you say separate from the world where every day you're going to Babylon and you're in the world? How do you separate? You can't. You're in Babylon. You're in the king's palace, right? But Daniel purposed in his heart that he was going to do certain things. He was going to make his little stands, and he took that stand. And he made sure that he understood Babylon and what Babylon's influence was. So what I want to do tonight is really just take a broad snapshot of all the things that are going on in the world, and not spend any one detail in any one particular area, but just look at all the different things that are converging in this exponential curve. I was talking to Carmel, and she mentioned Maddie Norton's current events talk he did in our camp a couple of years back, 4 years ago in fact, and he mentioned the J-curve, and he said how that in the J-curve the world is running into these exponential areas, these unprecedented places where they've never been before, but everyone knows it can't go on. Significant changes must happen. So what I'd like to do is look at all the J-curves that are in the world at the moment and just take a very brief snapshot on each and consider that each one of these things, each one of these issues demands a significant change in itself, demands a change in the way the world has been, right? Demands a change in the way we do things, right? The way we live, the way we worship, right? And for us to be prepared. Now, I put a question mark there because as much as I'd like to say that it's all going to climax in the return of Christ, well, we may have another Middle Eastern confrontation before Israel truly lives without walls, nor bars, nor gates. Andy Walton's World Watch, he speculates that there may be another Middle Eastern war where the walls come down, where Israel is dwelling without walls, because at the moment everything is about who's on the other side of the wall. And you read Ezekiel 38 and it's without bars, nor walls, nor gates, dwelling confidently. And so I think there's a lot of merit in that idea. He actually references Psalm 87 to back it up, the Arabs and the Israelis fighting this last great war. If you get a chance, Google the Greater Israel Project. It's a foreign policy document that Israel released around the 80s, where they talk about extending the borders of Israel's influence. Ironically, from the Nile to the Euphrates. That's the language they use. And how their intention to guarantee Israel's security into the next 100 years, they cannot do it with their current borders. It is simply impossible. And so the only choice Israel feels it has is to expand or be absorbed. And so on Israel's foreign policy, their long-term strategy is the destabilisation of Iraq, the destabilisation and fragmentation of Syria, and then finally the pushing out of their borders. And of course Iran is very much in the crosshairs. Have a look, it's a very long document, but it's well worth a look. Okay? So as much as I'd like to say, well, Jesus is going to happen, we have to be prepared for the eventuality that there may be a few more things before Jesus does return. And for those of us with children, this is the world you're bringing your children into. We must be engaged. So on the side here we have a very hot topic at the moment is the total moral confusion of the world, which then leads into gender confusion. Now, I was in Hungry Jack's with my boy. We're trying to do this little father-son once a month where I buy them something cheap and we have a chat just about how they're tracking. And so we're trying that this year just so I can know where they're at and how they're thinking and all the rest. And they get a Sunday, much to my wife's disgust, and because we're on a health binge. But we were in Hungry Jack's and they had the screen which shows all the Hot 20. Like the countdown, the latest and greatest. And we had to move because there's these women twerking and carrying on. There's people in vulgar poses. It was the most vulgar thing. And this is a family restaurant and you got this up on the screen and there's children in that restaurant and they're watching all of this go on. And so Hollywood now is currently facing a reform of sorts. Now it's been going on for decades. People have been highlighting Hollywood's abuses for decades. But Harvey Weinstein and all these celebrities, the Me Too vote, are now saying, whoa, look at the terrible things going on in Hollywood. Hollywood is a cesspool. Hollywood has one objective, and that is the utter breakdown and destruction of anything godly, Christian, moral, family-orientated. That's what they're dedicated to. You will find very few movies out there that exonerate Christian values. Right? In fact, Christianity is constantly under attack in some way, shape or form. And these people are the poster child, and their job is to push the boundaries, to try new things, to shock people and get everyone talking, discussing, debating and dividing. Right? And of course the gender issue is very much on Australia's radar. They've now passed gay marriage. And so now we have to push gender equality, gender inclusion. And there was that little thing in Melbourne recently where the library was thinking of targeting Thomas the Tank Engine because he's not gender inclusive enough. I imagine there's not a female tank engine or whatever their issue was. And the whole Australian population goes, "You what?" And then they all back to us and say, no, we're going to ban books. We won't ban books. But we have to have this discussion because he and she is a form of discrimination. And again, brothers and sisters, when you listen to this, yes, we can get involved in the to's and the fro's, but just remember that there is a large part of this issue is not about the issue, but it's about the debate and the division and the conflict that these things produce. You notice that? If you think logically about these things for a tiny second, it doesn't work. Any logical person, doesn't have to be Christian, knows these things are fraught with issues, yet they're being pushed upon us. Right? Here's another one they're talking about where they're saying, well, young people need, who are confused about what they are, perhaps they should delay becoming adults until they've worked out and maybe they have an operation. You think, well, this is bizarre. And another group of doctors say this is not based on anything. It's not based on logic. It's not based on good medicine practice. And confusion with young people has been happening forever, and we've never done this. And so this debate's raging. They've got this institute in London. They spent millions of dollars on it, which is designed to transition people. And so this is the world that we live in. There is total moral confusion. And people fighting and arguing and squabbling, male from female, the workers, rich and the poor. Everyone's arguing and fighting. And if you've ever looked at any papers that talk about how power acts and how power works and how power controls the population, the most classic thing is divide and conquer. If you want to move your population in a particular direction and you know they're not going to be happy with that direction, the old Roman thing, bread and circuses, just throw every distraction in the book, get them all distracted with things, and then they're not going to care what happens in the world around us. We see a very similar thing happening today, where we just keep to get pounded with issue after issue designed to get people fighting. And sometimes you've got to step back and go, well, what am I fighting about? And is it the fight the point, and therefore I probably shouldn't fight, and I should probably not even worry about that and look at the other issues, look at the big picture. Civil unrest, of course, is tied in with all of this conflict. And here's a mob called the Guy Delt Project. Right? They are people that gather statistics and they put them in visual formats. And they have a global map of civil unrest. And the red is unrest, as in protest movements, then cyber terrorism, and then protests. And as you can see, the world is in a state of unrest. There are protests happening everywhere. Venezuela has recently exploded. Argentina is on the brink. Brazil can't handle all the people trying to leave Venezuela. Italy is currently facing a major economic crisis. The whole Eurozone thing has had question marks around it for a long time. People are upset, people are angry, and people are protesting. And it's happening all over the world. This is one of those exponential curves where something big could well happen. And we mentioned the Venezuelan. They've got a refugee problem at the moment. People are so sick of the complete breakdown of Venezuelan society that they're actually leaving and trying to go into Venezuela. And the poor Brazilians can't keep up with it. Now, the other thing that we're talking about as well is the decline of the American empire. And this is something that's been gathering pace now for a couple of decades, but it's again ramping up. It's hit that exponential curve. Iraq tried to go off the dollar. America attacked it. Venezuela tried to go off the dollar. There was an aircraft carrier on their doorstep. So America has been able to keep people firm to the dollar, right, for a long time. But now Russia and China are not powers that are so easily pushed around. And now Russia's saying, well, we would like to buy oil, not using the American dollar, We want to buy oil using the Chinese currency. And if you want us as a purchaser, you have no choice. So once upon a time, the Americans won World War II, and they said, right, Europe, we're going to rebuild your cities using American dollars, fiat money, printed money. The deal is you're using the dollar for everything you ever do from ever after. So America became the reserve currency, which allowed America to do amazing things. They could expand their currency and fight wars, but because everybody was using the dollar, a tiny 5% increase would filter down as inflation, whereas Zimbabwe tried to inflate their way out of their debts, and a loaf of bread cost $1 billion. So America did what Rome did in Jesus' day. They imposed their currency on their empire. And then they said to everybody, hey, you can still redeem your currency in gold. We'll keep gold, and we promise we won't inflate it more than the gold we have in our vault. In the 70s, the French said, yeah, right, you're fighting the Vietnam War. There is no way knowing you are not inflating your currency. And the French started shipping back billions of dollars of cash and demanding gold. And they called their bluff. And America had not enough gold to satisfy the dollars in circulation. They'd lied. So then they closed the gold window and they said, right, we're going off the gold standard. Not going to happen anymore. A few months after that, they struck a deal with Saudi Arabia over the petrodollar. And so the dollar has been tied to oil ever since. So oil-producing countries demand payment for oil in American dollars, then they get those dollars and they cycle it back into America and they buy government debt, and they get an IOU from America, which is interest-bearing, which is why Saudi Arabia owns probably around 12% of the entire of America, because they've been cycling dollars back into America, because America always runs a deficit. And that's how it's been working. So China, if they wanted to buy oil, it was like, sorry, you must use American dollars. That's the only currency we'll accept. Now China is so big, they can say, well, guess what? We're actually only going to be paying with this. If you want us a customer, if you want Chinese business, you will accept it. And everybody's changing over. Russia has done something similar. Putin has said, we are not going to accept American dollars at our seaports. Now, that is huge. Basically, Russia is saying, if you want to trade in Russian goods and bring Russian goods in, you better have rubles. Otherwise, you are not welcome in our seaports. And so these second and third most powerful nations have said to the American dollar, come on, bring it. This is what we're doing, and if you think you can take us both on, good luck to you. And of course we have the lesson of Hitler and Napoleon for anybody who's ever tried to take on Russia. Best general they have is General Winter. Works every single time. And so Russia's response to the sanctions which America has been hitting them with is to say to everybody, hey, we're doing it, jump on board. Right? China's got their new development bank. Right? Australia has joined, England's joined, and America's like, hang on, don't you realise that none of this development bank is going to be in dollars? And we're saying, well, yeah, we know, but we don't want to be left behind. This is kind of like where the future is. And so more and more countries are moving away from the American dollar. Now, what's going to happen to the current financial system? It's an exponential curve. We are due for a reset. We are due for something which will change currencies. These things never happen smoothly. They always happen with significant resetting, upset, right? On top of that, you've got the spectre of deglobalisation. The European Union is now fragmenting. It's starting to fall apart, right? People are questioning. Those people are being heard. They are almost winning elections. The European Union is hanging on by the skin of its teeth. Austria has just got a far-right politician, highly critical of the euro. We know about Brexit, don't we? The French lady, Le Pen, narrowly lost. Right? She could have won. She was close. She was a contender. Right? So were the Dutch. Now Italy is talking about leaving. Right? So it's not a union that you'd put your confidence in moving forward. It's another one of those potential exponential curves where the numbers of crises are getting to the point where something could happen. On top of that, China is merrily blasting away with its Silk Route. And that is a railroad that goes from Beijing to London in 3 days. That's the plan. High-speed rail. And so they're saying to the Americans and the British, well, you may control the seas, you may control all those things, but you don't control our railway. And so they're going to build Eurasia, they're going to pull Eurasia together using all these high-speed rail systems. And so they're saying, well, to everyone, get on board. We don't like the way the Americans have abused their monopoly. China's going to do things differently. China is going to conduct business equitably. And you know what? They are. When China moves into Africa, they give good deals, much better deals than the Americans, which is why the Africans are saying, well, we find America quite exploitative. We find China quite generous. We would like to do business with China. And America, again, is losing its influence. And so this, of course, deals with the declining American empire. Since World War II, it has been Pax America. America has been the empire that has imposed its will on the world. That is now about to change, and we see a lot of fragmenting, we see a lot of deglobalisation, and there's talk of a dollar transition and what the future will hold. And along comes a guy called George Soros. If you ever want an interesting case study, look at this man's influence in Europe and look at the kind of things he's put his money towards. Russia's recently banned him for interfering in their internal politics, right? But he's got the solution to keep Europe together. And he admits that Europe faces an existential crisis. The existence of Europe is hanging in the balance. Something has to be done, and it has to be done now. And he said that May this year. And this is in the last 3 weeks of headlines. Right? So we have Italy's political crisis, then the danger it poses to the global economy. We have Al Jazeera. Venezuela is about to explode. We have CNN. Turkey's economy is at risk as their currency takes a nosedive. Right? We have the Argentinian peso is also having problems. Right? We know of Venezuela, we know of Brazil, and it says that the other one is how the next economic crisis could make or break cryptocurrencies. And so everywhere you look, and these are all in the last 2 weeks, we have a world where the exponential curve is getting to breaking point. And everyone's saying, something's got to give, something's got to happen. Now, cryptocurrencies is what I'd like to talk a little bit about next. They're calling it the future of money. It's digital money. And so a lot of long-term speculators and forecasters are saying that eventually there will be no cash and we will have a digital wallet. So how many show of hands pay with a PayWave regularly? I do. How many pay with your phones? I don't, because I haven't worked out. But if I did, I probably would, because it's very handy, right? So we're already doing this right now. And of course now they're saying, well, eventually we can phase out currency, but then these cryptocurrencies are coming along, exclusively digital currencies. Now there's a lot to say about cryptocurrencies, except for the fact that it is very much likely to be the future of money. One day you will only ever have a digital wallet. That's the only thing that you'll be able to use. And they're talking that cash could phase its way out within the next 10 years. And so all the central banks now are saying, we need to get on board with this. We need to do this. It comes with a lot of pluses. It's a very unhackable system. It's a very uncorruptible system. It's fairly rock solid. Right? So that's the way of the future. That's the way they're all talking. And then, of course, we have all the wars and hotspots that are going on around the world. And we mentioned them at the beginning of our talk. The fact that the world this year has come to the very brink of what could have exploded to a very significant conflict. And a lot of them are around resources, oil and gas. Now that is the Council of Foreign Relations website. And the Council of Foreign Relations is an American political think tank that is advising presidents, has done so since the 1920s. It's made up of rich people, media outlets, generals in the army and retired politicians. So the best of the best advise America on its foreign policy obligations and protecting their interests, right? Now they have this very handy little map which shows the critical conflicts, the significant conflicts and the limited conflicts. And as you can see, South China Sea is critical. China, Philippines, Taiwan and in Japan are now in a potential situation where over islands, man-made islands, where they dump all this dirt in the sea and build an airport and a naval base. And then they put weapons on there. And like, well, no, hang on, it's not dual sea and it's not dual waters. Well, yes, it is now because we have an aircraft carrier there. And so there's all this squabbling going on between these countries over who controls that area. So what does America do? Well, America says, Taiwan, you want some missiles? China says, you do that, we'll consider it an act of war. And so there's all this argy-bargy going on, which could blow out further. And what we're seeing is that the remains of the American containment policy. After World War II, America said, well, you can't invade Russia. They just keep retreating until winter hits and then you freeze. You can't invade them, can't really invade China, so why don't we contain them? And so America ringed all of those countries with military bases and alliances and contained Russia and China. Well, now China's saying, well, hey, we have 2 aircraft carriers now and we don't like being contained. So we would like to break out, thank you. And now Russia's saying, well, you know what, we don't want to either. We want a base in Syria. We would like to project power, thank you. And America goes, but why? And they say, well, you do it. Why can't we? It's kind of fair enough, really, isn't it? America just assumes, you know, what do they call it? American exceptionalism. We can do these things because we're America, which is idiotic. But that's how they think, right? The Middle East is another one, as we know, and Ukraine also is a conflict that is ready to explode. And then you have the minor conflicts as well. So there's a number of hotspots that are also poised. And you look at the history of the last few wars. Alan Greenspan told us very clearly, he didn't like the Bushes, but he told us very clearly, Iraq was about oil and resources, right? Before Libya was attacked and Gaddafi was targeted as an evil man, Libya announced 2 years earlier that they were going to kick out American oil companies because China was offering a better deal, right? And so there's a number of media articles that talked about the fact that Libya did not want to do business with the West anymore. Libya has, after Nigeria, the second largest oil reserves in Africa, a significant power. And he said, well, we don't want to give you preferential treatment anymore because the China are better people to deal with. 2 years later, Gaddafi was dead, and Obama said, we're here to stand with the Libyan people and we're here to show them freedom and democracy, and all this was blazoned over the headlines that this man is evil and he's got to die and the Libyan people deserve a chance at democracy and freedom. That's what they all said. What is Libya doing now? Well, Libya is engaged in a civil war, hundreds of dying every single day. How many articles do you get to read on Libya today? None. The focus of the world has moved on. They came, they stole the oil, they put it in the hands of people who were friendly to them, they trashed the joint, and they moved on. All of those words that were uttered were utterly meaningless. The Bible tells us, by their fruits ye shall know them. And you look at all of America's military freedom fighting wars. Iraq, it's smashed to pieces. Afghanistan, smashed to pieces. Libya. And at some point, brothers and sisters, you have to look at these authoritative figures and say, well, you keep telling us this. I'm going to wait and see what your actions say because your words have a consistent track record of lying. And of course, we come to the Syrian conflict, right? And we have a tale of 2 pipelines. Now, I can go into a lot more detail about that, but it will take a whole talk in itself. But essentially, Russia and Iran have one gas pipeline deal, and they're saying to Assad, we'd like to use Syria to bring it up into a Turkish network that goes into Europe via Austria. And Iran and Syria go, yep, we like this, we're all going to make a ton of money. Meanwhile, Qatar is saying, well, we actually want to bring gas into Europe as well, and we want to go through Syria too. And Assad let them initially, was sort of favourable towards the idea, that he changed his mind. And he changed his mind about, 6-7 years ago now. And of course, Qatar was the first. The Americans admitted that Qatar was backing ISIS. In fact, it probably founded ISIS. Right? And this very wealthy little nation in the Persian Gulf was pouring millions of dollars into trying to get rid of Assad. And it largely comes down to competition over who's going to supply gas into Europe. And so do you take it from Qatar? Do you take it from Iran? And that's why Russia was in there. Russia doesn't care about Assad. Russia's not in love with Syria. Russia's protecting its interest. That's all. And this is it. None of these countries care about the Syrians. None of them. Like, no one is there because they care. They are there to preserve their interest, and if they have to kill 1 million Syrians to get what they want, they will do so. That is the way the kingdoms of men have always fought. Even the Ukraine crisis is about oil and gas rivalry. Bringing oil in from the Black Sea through Ukraine would be wonderful because America's got their oil and gas pipelines that go into Georgia. And if they could get it up into Ukraine that way, they could supply Europe. Russia has successfully snookered them, so getting a pro-Western government to allow that to happen was what they wanted. So what did Russia do? They took the Crimean Peninsula. Now, no one's going to risk running a pipeline into Ukraine because they own Crimea. You could sabotage it. So this is the thing. All of these conflicts, the narrative goes it's about freedom and democracy and liberty and all this nonsense. It's not. It's about nations preserving their interests. And of course, lately we have Donald Trump forbidding the Russian pipeline. And Merkel going, well, thanks for your forbidding, but I think we need gas. So unless you're prepared to supply 1 billion bottles of gas, thank you. We appreciate your concern, but too bad, so sad. And so then Trump says, well, I'm going to declare sanctions on every company that's ever going to be using this. As well, good luck, that's half of Europe, right? So there's these bizarre things going on. Like, honestly, we are in a place that is without precedent. I mean, Donald Trump is just like, you know, you've got this failing empire, right? And everyone knows it's failing, but it's like a sanction for you, a tariff for you, a trade war for you. And it's just like, the world's go, you really want to bury yourself that quickly? Because you know what? We're working out we don't need you anymore. And you just think, is anybody telling him this? Is anybody saying to him, well, hey, don't you realise that the history of the world, tariffs always, like trade wars, always precede world wars, always, where the alliances break down. But here we are, history is repeating itself, and he's ratcheting up the tension everywhere, right? So, Russia and Europe, and what's going on at the moment. Actually, I'll duck back a little bit onto the trade wars, because that's really what's affecting Europe at the moment. So the ASX has said, we're facing uncertainty because America, Donald Trump, has single-handedly sparked a global trade war. Now, what's a trade war? Well, America had a free trade agreement, which meant you bring your goods in and we won't tax those goods. And we give our goods to you and you won't tax us. That's free trade. So America's saying, well, hey, we can't compete with the Chinese. They can pay their people less and make our products cheap. So right, China, if you want to bring your gear into America, we will be increasing the taxes by 30%, 25%. But he hasn't just done it to China, he's done it to Germany. That's America's ally. He's done it to everybody. Canada's facing tariffs, and he's just gone around the entire world going, right, tariffed. And everyone's just like, you what? You were the ones that were pushing hard for free trade agreements, and now you're turning around and you're doing all of this. And so there's all these articles out there, just this last fortnight, the world is on the brink of a major trade war. And you think, as if the world didn't need any more to be added to the curve. And yet here he is, going mad with his tariffs. And so now Europe's looking at itself and going, well, all right, because the Americans were ramping up the fear, we looked at Russia as a problem and we went along with NATO and all the rest. Well, now the head of the ECB, or the ex-head of the ECB, EU Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, who used to be the head of the European Central Bank, he's just said, well, Europe, in the face of America, we're trying to do things right by them, but they're hurting us, maybe we should re-examine our policy towards Russia. Maybe we should start working with Russia a little bit more. And you know what? All the German corporations are going, yes, that's what we want. We don't want this. The political dialogue is dominated by global events, but on the street level, the companies and the corporations, they operate at a different level. And the inertia in France and in Germany is very much, Russia's good for business. We want to do business with Russia. And now America's just made itself the world's worst enemy. Well, there's a natural symmetry. Well, forget about the Atlantic. Let's focus on Eurasia. Right. So, as you can see, brothers and sisters, there are so many snapshot things that when you look at them, you think, that can't go anywhere but somewhere not good. And that is unsustainable. And that's going to wind up in not a good place. And you think, well, where is it all going to head? And what is the world going to look like? And that's something which I think we need to think about ourselves. So now I'd like to deal very quickly with the idea of the technological invasion of our lives. You may have heard of the Internet of Things and IPv6. So at the moment when you go on the internet, you're allocated a number. That might be 192.168.1.257. And so you're not you're a number. And your number interacts with web pages that are also numbers. And everybody's got a number. It's a bit like the phone system. In the phone book, you're not you're a number. That's all you are. But the length of the numbers it only allows for a limited amount of things to be on the internet. And so we're now running out of numbers. There are so many web pages and so many people all online, all given their own number, that these 192.168.154. is not enough. So IPv6 has come along, which is a new format of identifying people on the internet. It's interspersed numbers and letters, and I think it's, 12 characters? How long is it? It's quite long.
6 octets.
Huh?
6 octets.
6 octets. How many is that? Lots. And what they're 48, right? Now, within numbers and letters, there is now almost an infinite possibility, infinite numbers. So what they're saying is, well, 5G is being tested in America at the moment, and that's going to have wireless frequencies of much, much higher than what we've ever had before. So now you're going to have your fridge, your toaster, your car, everything's going to be on the internet. Now, why do they want that? Well, for the simple reason, there's a number of reasons. One is control, but the other one is fraud. You say you have a car accident, and you go along and you say, I service my car regularly. Yeah, using Bob the drunk at the back of my house, So you lie on the form, you get the insurance payout. In the Internet of Things, every time you go to a petrol station, there are sensors that are now picking up what you do and where you go, how often you fill up, how often you get the brakes changed, how often all these things happen. And the data that's generated is fed into the network. So now you come to fill out your insurance form, you say, I honestly didn't speed. And they go, well, you did. Because on the internet connection on your car, it shows that you were doing 95 kilometres before you hit that wall. And you don't service your car like you said you would, because we can see that you only changed the brakes then and then and then. And so all this data is now in a usable position because everything has an internet address. Now, obviously, there's privacy advocacy groups go, wow, this is terrible. But the inertia is very much for this. It's going to happen. It will happen. And the companies, the big businesses, are right behind it, and there's millions of dollars. So what they're saying now, and this is the Business Insider, there'll be 24 billion Internet of Things, IoT, devices installed on Earth by 2020. It is going to explode. Smart this, smart that, smart everything, right? It's all going to be online, the Internet of everything. Not only that, Facebook is now moving into the area of brain-computer interfaces, right? And that's another brain, like cutting-edge area of technology, how to integrate the internet with our brain. Google has been testing this contact lens, and one thing that they've speculated, and they've not given much out in the last year, but one thing they've speculated is that you can have a lens on your eye which gives you meaningful information, but then you can actually have a tiny little camera that beams stuff onto your retina. And that has a wireless antenna that hooks up to your router. You can see where this is going. So you're sitting at a park bench and you're connected online and you want to watch a movie, the whole of your vision becomes the screen. And now you can see everything going on. So they're looking at that. Others are looking at helmets. Some are even saying, well, let's just inject directly onto the brain and see what happens. Right? So DARPA is saying, well, we need to integrate the brain and computers, and this is Elon Musk. He's not doing so well at the moment. But all his cars are burning and crashing and killing their owners and things, so it's not a good thing for him at the minute. But he has funded millions of dollars into a project with which he's talking neurolace, where he's injected this thing into a rat and a dog, and it wraps around the brain, measures everything. It's called neurolace, and allows you to interface and read thoughts. But that's where it's headed, and that's what they want. And the venture capitalist, there's a guy on TED who's a venture capitalist. He's got something like $600 million on tap, and he runs around the world at the moment. He says, my job at the moment is pouring millions of dollars into these technologies. That's what this is all about, because he said, wouldn't it be awesome if we could do all of these things? And look, it would be. There's a part of me that goes, gee, that would be so cool. You know, these, like, what is that game where everyone's running around town trying to kill things? What was it called again? What was that game? Pokemon Go. You imagine, it's in your eyes, you're like, dead, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And computer games with your friends where you're running around in a park and you're sort of like, unless someone falls off a cliff. But this is the sort of thing, like they're talking that, you know, say Nathan goes skydiving and I can't go skydiving, I just log in and I can see everything he's seeing and I can experience what he's experiencing. They're talking you can learn a language in a week. They're talking all these amazing things. We can be our own gods. We can make our own reality. And this guy, he's so excited when he's telling this story. And at the end of his TED speech, he says, now, of course, we could all get hacked. And that would be a bad thing. But wouldn't it be cool if we could... And so he spends 2 minutes on the dangers. And the rest of us are, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Right? And so... that's what's happening in the world at the moment. So all these things are converging together. Google at the moment has got this balloon project where they reckon they're going to flood the world with internet, with these balloons that stay out for 5 years, and basically they put internet out in the world. And so what they're saying is when we've all got our digital wallets, even in Africa, you can have a digital wallet, there'll be a balloon above you somewhere, and you can transact and do business. Right? And so we mentioned the cashless. Well, Sweden seems to be the test case for that. There's a big drive in Sweden at the moment to eliminate cash, and they're about 80% there. Not only that, in the Swedish metros now, if you can get a chip which you can inject in yourself for a couple of $100, it links up to your credit card, and you can now jump on the train, and there's a little hand scanner, and off you go. And so these sorts of things are being experimented with. What is the interaction with technology? And it's getting closer and closer to home. Eventually they're now saying, well, let's stick it in our bodies and let's see how that works out for us. Now, some of you may have heard of artificial intelligence. Some of you may not know what artificial intelligence is. Well, let me explain it very briefly. In the old days, you needed to, say a computer needed to play chess, right? So you had to get the computer and program every single conceivable chess move that you could anticipate into that thing and say, if that happens, do that. If that happens, do that. If that happens, do that. Then you'd let it loose on the grand chess master and he'd smash it. And they're like, okay. So then the number crunchers would go, brrr. He did that, fix him. He did that, fix him. Now, they went on for like 10 years refining this until the end. They crunched every single combination and they finally beat that Gary Kasparov, whatever his name is. And they beat him with Deep Blue. It was just like, whoa, we've beaten a human with chess. Artificial intelligence, you don't do that. You simply get all the games that have ever been played and you feed it in. And the computer goes, so the rook goes there, that goes there, the rule is this, the rule is that, oh, look at all these combinations. And the computer does the learning. You don't have to type it in. So, we used to, with computers, we type in search phrases. So if you're in medicine, you get all the records of the medical documents and you say, right, search for phrase thus. And it searches for everything that matches that phrase. Well, in artificial intelligence, you can say, I want you to find this particular problem and the solution that was done, but only if it does this and this and this. And it will go and find all the results. It's intuitive. It problem solves. It thinks things through. They got this device, like a robot, with artificial intelligence, and they put it in an obstacle room, and the thing sort of went, crack, and it fell over. And then it backed up, looked, and then it went up and over. Then it got to the other thing, and there's a hole, and it fell in. So they go out the hole and they're right, okay, I've got to clearly jump over that. And they let this thing in there for hours, and it learnt its way around the obstacle course. It figured it out. It didn't have to have a programmer going, when you fall into the ditch, you will need to jump this. The computer learnt by itself. That's what artificial intelligence is. So Vladimir Putin comes along, and there's now an arms race, because they're saying, whoa, so you can program a robot drone to work out what targets are, and when it sees it, the drone will fire without any human instructions. That sounds pretty cool. So Vladimir Putin's jumped on the board, and he said, well, look, whoever rules in artificial intelligence will have the ability, the computing power, the problem-solving ability to rule the world. And so he knows that he doesn't have Facebook and Twitter and Google, he doesn't have control of the information flow, but Putin has said on Russian media that he will weaponize artificial intelligence. And what does he mean by that? Well, things like this. The weaponization, an unmanned drone that will take off by itself, find a target, bomb the target, return home, land, and a human has not touched that thing. In Israel, they're experimenting with drone swarms, where this swarm of drones hovers around the place and is controlled by this central thing, again, an artificial intelligence that's been programmed to look at problems in areas like that, and it will detect a thing, and this drone swarm will come in and just take it out. And so Elon Musk, who's very much into this sort of research, he said, after Putin said what he said artificial intelligence will most likely be the cause of World War III. And so they're talking that in World War III, you have these artificial intelligent godlike things. So he has this weapon, he has that weapon, and they're going to be duking it out. And you think, well, sounds bizarre. But that's what they're talking. And this is not the Bible, this is people talking that this is the way the future of war will be fought. And who knows, God may be called to intervene on humans that have discovered that they have the power to be gods in knowledge, information, and in weaponry. And I just want to draw your attention to the king of the north here, because I found it in Daniel, and I remember when Putin said what he said, I thought, wow, that's interesting. This is the king of the north, right? And he says, he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now, he's talking about our day. Our day. He is worshipped as a god. He lifts himself up as a god. Now, what gives humans the confidence to go, I am a god? Well, maybe a weapon that can take out any opposition may give you that confidence. Or a weapon that knows everything may give you that confidence. And he says, he speaks marvellous things against the God of gods, and he shall prosper till indignation be accomplished. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers or the desire of women or any god, because he will magnify himself above all. And in his state he shall honour the God of forces, a God who his fathers did not know. Now, if the Bible's trying to predict our day, people are saying that artificial intelligence will give us godlike powers to weaponise the world and to fight wars. So maybe that Russia will come down into Israel and they will have some super weapon that makes them completely impervious to the fact that this man does genuinely feel that he is a god because he has this power, and that he is basically accepted that he has this godlike power. And the thing is, the man of sin in Thessalonians and the king of the north in Daniel 11 both share these attributes where they elevate themselves as gods and they accept it as gods. Right? So it's interesting, brothers and sisters, that we will probably be taken well before that, and thank God for that, that the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation may be fought between two global powers that have these weapon systems, which will effectively, if God doesn't intervene, they will wipe everybody and everything out. Now, I just want to show you, this is the Department of Defence website. It's the speech that Bill Clinton's Minister of Defence gave, and that's him there, William S. Cohen. And he gave this speech in 1997. And this is what he had to say. Now, this is 1997, brothers and sisters. It's on the government website. And he goes, Alvin Toffler has written about these things in terms like viruses, man-made viruses, with scientists in their laboratories trying to devise certain types of pathogens that would be ethnic specific so that they could eliminate certain ethnic groups and races. Others are designing some kind of engineering, some sort of insects that can destroy crops. Others are engaging even in an eco type of terrorism where they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes and volcanoes magnetically through the use of electronic magnetic waves. He says, so there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror on other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts, and that's why this is so important. And I remember Neville Clark doing a talk where he sort of said, well, why is it when Jesus returns, you've still got opposition to him? You think, well, surely if Jesus returns, that the presence of Jesus in the earth is going to make people go, whoa, that's incredible. And he speculated that maybe that people have already got earthquake weapons, so an earthquake somewhere in the world is not particularly a thing. And when I read that, I thought, well, there you go. That was speculated as a threat to the American security back in 1997. So brothers and sisters, we are in a very interesting time of history. And of course, Jesus will more than likely return before any of these things break out in a serious way. But how much of it will we need to live through? How much older will our children grow in this world? Right? What kind of things do we need to discuss? Right? So our policies on conscientious objection. Right? If the economy is in such a fragile state, what are your debt levels? Do you have things in reserve? If things did go belly up, could you keep going without going bankrupt? What kind of conversations do we need to have, brothers and sisters? Now, for those of you who are retired, who have superannuation, who own your own houses, well, you know, we need your support. We've got kids. But for us with children, you know, our children are growing up in this world. And for me, I look at that and think, well, I'm the dad. I have to make sure that my boys are equipped to actually handle the world. I have to know what's happening. And it may well be, and I do believe, this is my own personal opinion, you don't have to share it if you don't like, but I do think there will be one more Middle Eastern war before Jesus comes back, and out of that war we will see Israel confident. Now you may not share my opinion, and that's perfectly fine. I guess we'll wait and see. It's not a dogmatically held view of mine, right? But I think that may well happen, in which case we have time. We have a little more time. Now, obviously, we all hope and pray Jesus comes next week. But given the way the world is, this is what we are in, this is what we're living in, and we need to basically take the words of Luke chapter 21. Right? When these things begin to take place, and it's like prophetic, God could see, Jesus could see what humans would be doing all the time. Straighten up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing nigh. Thank you.